everybody, and welcome to the latest Flexible Space Association's podcast series. So I'm Jane Startin, I'm the Executive Director of the Flexible Space Association. Topic this afternoon is the increasing importance of data and technology to flex operators, which I think is something that's been coming up quite a lot as a subject in recent weeks that people are interested in. So I'm hoping that our guests this afternoon will be able to inform us more on this. And I'm going to hand over to them to introduce themselves and where they're from, rather than reading out lists of names, biographies. So if we can start with Adam.
Sure, thanks Jane. Good afternoon everyone. My name's Adam Blaski. Productive is a flex space advisory and analytics platform that's really designed to help landlords and operators of flex space thrive in an increasingly competitive environment. From an advisory capacity, really what we look at is ensuring that processes and workflows are aligned with the customer journeys and customer experience that operators are wanting to deliver. And then from an analytics perspective, it's all about harnessing the right data points to be able to have detailed information and enough information to give meaningful insights that we really understand how spaces are being used and consumed in order to provide that productivity solution that increasingly members are looking for.
Great, thank you. And Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm the CIO at the Office Group, and we are a flex space provider, mostly based in London, and we are growing into Europe. And over the last couple of years, with Blackstone's investment, we've been making some substantial investments in our technology and our technology roadmap. And it's been an interesting journey. We've got about 40 operating sites at the moment, so there's a lot of rich data that we're able to collect and use as part of understanding how people work and operate within the spaces that we provide.
Great, thank you. And finally, Miro.
Hey everyone, so I'm Miro from Office R&D, yeah, we've been building a co-working and flexible workspace management platform for the last 5 years, and we currently work with about 700 operators worldwide. That's about 1,500 buildings. Yeah, it's been an exciting journey so far. A lot of technologies are involved in our platform, and yeah, we are super excited about the future of flexible working.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've got some questions for our panel, but also just to encourage everybody watching to use the chat box that you can hopefully see on your screens to join in and ask questions, and either we'll pick those up maybe as we go through, or at the end we'll try and leave a bit of time for questions as well. So to start with, over the coming weeks, we're expecting people returning to work at flexible workspaces around the UK, and I think that is beginning to see signs of that happening a bit more already now. How can we use data to help towards providing a safe return to all? And maybe start with Adam on that.
Well, I think people are itching to get back into flexible workspaces. You know, working from home has been a great experiment for everyone, but the reason flexible workspaces and co-working exist is because you cannot replicate that community and that vibe anywhere else. So I think people are kind of desperate to get back into the workplace. The problem, of course, is not the workplace itself, it's kind of how we get there. So, you know, if you've got to get on the tube, that's going to be a problem for many. Those that can get in by bike or walk or by car will be in a better place. And once you've dealt with a lift, you know, a flexible workspace can provide a fairly safe haven. But of course, you know, data is super important to really understand how many people are in spaces, what the occupancy rates are, to ensure that, you know, the distancing that we need to maintain for, you know, the foreseeable future can be maintained.
Okay, thank you. Peter, do you want to take that one next?
Yeah, so we've been monitoring the usage within our space and mostly using an access control system to understand how people are coming back into the buildings. And over the last sort of week, we've seen a doubling in occupancy, but that's still not even 1% of the typical attendance we see in our buildings on a general day. So it's going to be very interesting to see when people start coming back into the spaces, exactly where they go and how they start to use it and where they start to dwell. So we're going to look at collecting data from multiple sources to try and understand exactly where people are spending their time within the spaces and understanding what sort of behaviors we're seeing. It's going to be very interesting to see the heat maps of where people spend their time. So and with that, we were able to adjust our plans. So the government is obviously maintaining the position that we need to be very flexible and respond to the changing environment. And so using the data to see how things are how people are using the spaces, and then being able to react to make changes to encourage the behavior for safety is going to be an interesting one for us. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see exactly how people use the space when they come back.
Okay, and Miro?
Yeah, well, I am actually today in the office, and we are in a flexible workspace, and it's extremely exciting, first of all. Yeah, I'll give you an example. So today we have 10 people actually in a building that's for 1,000, the entire space, so not very high occupancy, but indeed it's extremely important to actually measure this, and not just so that just to measure it for the sake of having the data, but also in an unfortunate case of someone testing positive, it's super important to know who else was in the building, and so that you can actually eventually test more people that are based on real data. So I think the measuring the occupancy right now is indeed more important than ever, and not just theoretical occupancy, but also real-time utilization. So how much actual time people spent, and what are the time that people arrived or leaving the space. So using a real check-in system, if possible automated, is ideal in this case. So there are a lot of reasons to do so. Oh yeah.
Thank you. So I think this has been touched on a bit, but is there anything more that we can explore in the way of the use of technology to manage occupancy rates and dwell times, and how to use open plan co-working areas? Peter, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of our plans for return to work, we've communicated to our members a specific plan that we have in place to manage occupancy, and it's a very cautious approach initially, because we don't know how many people are going to come back, and we don't know how quickly they're going to come back, and we don't know if everyone's going to arrive on the same day and say, hey, we're back. So we've got a very cautious initial approach, and I think that as we start to take the data that we collect from our Wi-Fi hotspots and looking at access control and time of days, it's going to be very interesting to see what that actually looks like, and then start to shape our plans to suit that better. So we're going to be looking at a multitude of technologies to understand how the people use the space and how they move around. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge, and we're going to be working with a lot of partners to make that work. Obviously, occupancy sensing is a subject that has been on the radar within PropTech for some time, but it's very capital intensive, and it's slow to deploy. And so it's going to be great to see how we can use the other technologies to start capturing some of that data and start making sense of it and compare it to previous days and sort of previous months.
Is there anything Adam or Miro would like to add on that?
Yeah, I think just echoing what Peter said, really, it's always been important to track how people use the space, and never more important than the situation we're in now. The challenge, of course, has been twofold. It's how do we track that data, which can be expensive. It can be a distraction. Do we look at the data we get from Wi-Fi access points? Do we look at access to controlled card readers? Do we look at the data we get from the iPads on our front desks? Is it through membership cards being tapped in on RFID readers? So there's a plethora of sources. And at the same time, we're trying to run our business and maintain the status quo. And as the sector's evolved, I guess, over the last couple of years, and most operators are probably really focused around their office space, with only 20 to 30% of their portfolios dedicated to open plan and co-working space. It's maybe been a bit of an insurmountable challenge and a hurdle that people haven't kind of faced up to. And now we're in the situation where we really need to understand how people use those spaces. And so we can inform not just the situation that we're facing up to now and getting people back into buildings, but how we can expand portfolios and flexible operators can grow. And I think those technologies and the growth in PropTech has been huge over the last couple of years. That plethora of data that's out there. The question is, which data do I focus on? How do I focus on it? And that's what we're working with people to help solve.
Miro, is there anything else on that? I know you touched on it a bit.
Yeah, I think both Adam and Peter said well that right now is more important than ever to collect occupancy data from every possible way. So obviously, Wi-Fi is probably the easiest and most reliable way. Access control as well can provide some information on the occupancy, not necessarily super reliable, but good enough. Obviously, there are more expensive ways as well, like if you want to install some additional hardware to track this, there are plenty of options for sensors and beacons and whatnot, but probably for our industry, the Wi-Fi sounds like the most reliable and easiest to implement way to track the occupancy and have an automated check-in system. So I would personally use that. And a combination, of course, like could be a required check-in tablet on the reception, or maybe use the mobile app, but somewhat enforce it through a rule. But yeah, I think it's now is the time to really implement any strategy because now it's just hyper important, and this will only make our industry and your businesses better in the future. Because knowing your occupancy rate is always helpful, not necessarily in the current crisis, but in general.
So that's touched on perhaps some of the priority areas, but Miro, do you maybe want to build on that? There's a lot of talk of smart buildings in the flexible space sector. What does a true smart building look like?
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, so for me personally, a smart building, the first and most important element is the building automation. That touches upon many aspects of the building. Most of it is related to the air conditioning, lighting, and then a few other systems that are part of the building. But in the current crisis, I think especially the air conditioning is an important element of the building automation, because high quality fresh air is proven to be one of the best measures to reduce the risk of spreading diseases, not necessarily coronavirus, but this one as well. So on the smart building, yeah, definitely an investment in a high quality air induction system is more important than ever. There are plenty of other smart elements that can be added. I think one of the other important elements is the human experience and overall the people experience in the building, and adding all sorts of sensors and data points that can then be used to guide and make some smart decisions for the people. So yeah, just a random example, but if more people are in the building, then the temperature can be automatically adjusted and through the air conditioning system, or if there are fewer people, reduce it so that it doesn't get too cold and that kind of stuff. Obviously now also is not a bad idea to invest in these, although I mean it's a crisis, so it's hard to make any investment. So yeah, it's a tough one.
And Peter, is there anything that the Office Group is particularly doing in this area that you can talk about?
I mean, the smart buildings conversation is a fascinating one because it is so layered and there's so much that you can do. And I think that Miro talked about some of the stuff that's really, really important in terms of what is edging towards a hygiene factor, sort of expected these days. So an efficient building is one that reacts to usage. So one that turns up the temperature or turns down the temperature or ups the airflow when necessary based on occupancy and usage, and is able to react to that automatically. That makes your building greener and more efficient. And it also means that the people are more comfortable in it. And then if you start looking at comfort and you tie that into productivity, that's where it starts to become really interesting. So how do you then take things that you don't necessarily control through a building, but you look at like light and start measuring that, and then sound, and you start looking at air quality. And if you take those three things as part of an environment and you start to manage those more effectively through smart buildings, or at least start to understand how they impact on productivity, that's where it starts to become really interesting. And then, so that's just how effective am I at doing what I'm trying to do in this space. And that's, I think, something that we really are interested in. It's like, you don't come to the office group because you want an office. You come to the office group because you want to get a job done, and we provide a good space to be in. And how do we make that space the best for you to be productive in? And I think that's where smart buildings start to become very interesting in a sort of like slightly imperceptible way, but definitely effective in terms of productivity. And we know that through various partners that CO2 count, for example, is something that drastically affects your ability to concentrate. In a high CO2 environment, you can't concentrate, you can't be effective, you can't make good judgment calls. And being able to manage that and react to that is a really important part of making sure that our members are effective at what they do. And then other things about smart building is just making sure that you can get what you want and when you want it. So if you want to go and sit on the 7th floor and look out a window, you need to know where there's a desk available to go and sit on the 7th floor and look out a window. And it's about tying, the customer experience, sort of like a customer preference, to what's available at the right time and mashing those two things together. And that's where the real fun of smart building starts to come together. We actually it becomes this really sort of layered experience map that you build up over time. And you do that through a multitude of systems, both in physical space, but also the analytics of how space is used, and then also the customer and their preferences and their needs. And so that smart buildings thing is part of a very complex cake, but it's an important part of being able to provide that. So it manifests in many different ways, and there's about 100 different ways of doing the same thing in smart buildings. And it's a case, I think it's going to be very difficult to try and decide what is the right way to try and achieve this and gather these data points. And I think that as the flex space certainly matures, the expectation on quality of experience is going to change rather than availability of experience. So having an availability and a presence, that's obviously important. And we as the office group know that in London, having a presence of 40 odd buildings in London means that our members can be anywhere in the city and use our services. But on top of that, you need presence. And then on top of that, you need quality. And quality of experience isn't just decor. It's important. Design is important, but also that sort of the softer side of it. So it's really interesting, and we're looking at all sorts of stuff and trying to tie that in and seeing what sort of information we can gain and how we can manage environments better. So there's so many ways. It's a fascinating thing.
There's a lot packed in there, Adam. Is there anything that you feel has been missed that you'd like to just add?
Yeah, I completely echo what Peter said, and probably couldn't have put it much better myself. And that certainly helps provide, the experience and the productivity solution that people need. In fact, I'm reading the question that Rich has put there, and the other side of smart buildings is, what we've got at the moment, and the recent innovations in PropTech are super exciting, and we can use buildings in a different way. I mean, technology's never impacted an asset class as it's currently doing at the moment. And there's so many different possibilities. The government, for example, under the industrial strategy, have these grand challenges laid out. And a big one is reducing the energy consumption in buildings. So if you look at a flexible workspace operation and look at the building that it's in, by, for example, connecting your meeting room booking system to sensors in the room and connecting that in turn to your BMS, throws up some incredible possibilities. So what I mean by that is, a room can be booked and that room seats 10 people. Do we know how many people in the room? The only way we can qualify that is through the sensor that's in the room to make sure that although we've designed X number of meeting rooms that seat Y number of people, do we know how many people are in them? Now, there are also, issues with no-shows, with the overused and abused credit system in flex spaces and meeting rooms. So all this can be quickly addressed. And let's say it's a quiet time in the summer, you've only got one meeting room that's in use for 2 hours a day. Instead of your lights and aircon being on 24/7, your BMS and booking system are linked, so they can be switched on half an hour before the meeting starts and turn off half an hour after the meeting ends. And if somebody doesn't turn up, then the occupancy sensors pick them up and it switches things off 10 minutes later. So it throws up some really interesting ways of using buildings. And if that can reduce energy efficiency, then people can start saving a considerable amount of money and invest that in growing their business in other ways.
Okay, thank you. And Adam, you just referred to the question that's come in, and Mira, I wondered if you might have some thoughts on that. So this is members of the Flexible Space Association vary from the very large companies such as the Office Group to those running single traditional business centres. Have you got any tips for those running those traditional business centres on incorporating technology in their business in an efficient, cost-effective way? Was the question. I'm sure you can say it as well.
Yeah, well, I think there are two main aspects. So obviously, one option is to fully automate as many business processes as possible, and there are platforms, not necessarily Office R&D, but platforms that will do this pretty well and take care of a lot of administrative tasks fully, almost fully automated way. So that's one thing. Another thing will be obviously to give the so-called member tools to let's say tenants or members of the space, so that they can self-service themselves pretty efficiently. So that means doing everything in the space from booking, paying bills to, I don't know, submitting issues and tickets and communicating with the member staff. So basically, first of all, giving them good experience, and second, that can be also reducing the operational deficiencies of actually doing repetitive tasks there, like book the reception to book meeting rooms for the people. So I guess that's from my end.
Thank you. So obviously talked about some of the tools available. Can the data that you're gathering around the uses of space and the behaviours in them be used to shape the designs to better suit actual needs? Adam, is that something that you'd like to comment on first?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's only with the insight that we get from the data analytics that kind of reduces the risk and enables us to design the space that people need. If we don't have that data, then we're kind of shooting in the dark. So to really understand how space is being used, what areas are being used for collaborative work, what areas are being used for kind of more deep work and deep thinking, is really important. And that's where occupancy centres and check-in monitoring and so on just really comes into its element to allow us to design the spaces that people need. And that's absolutely essential in for operators who are rolling out and opening new buildings.
I would second that, and so one of the things, Adam, that we're finding now as we grow in the Office Group is that people moving into Flex, specifically first-time buyers in Flex, they don't necessarily know what they need. So you might be a 10-person company, and you might go and look for a 10-person office, and moving into Flex for the first time is like buying a house for the first time. It's a confusing. There's lots of variations to it. There's lots of things. There's lots of unknown unknowns. And so what we want to do with our customers is, once you've bought for the first time, is actually try and help you understand how you actually use the space instead of what you think you need, what you actually need. So, as a 10-person company, certainly in the modern world, but if you take this before coronavirus, what we would find is that you take a 10-person desk, but there'd only ever be 6 people in the office, because invariably 4 people are in meetings, or they're on calls, or they've gone to see their friend, or they're working in a different office, or they're working from home that day. And so people would overbuy. And so what we want to be able to do is to be able to have that conversation with that guy and say, that customer, and say, actually, you know what, you don't need a 10-person office, you need a 6-person office, and you need 4 co-working memberships. And that is going to suit you much better. So it's going to save you some money, 20% saving there on your revenue, on your costs. Plus, you're going to be able to make use of the space in a way that you actually need. And we can start sort of tying their behaviors to actually helping them be more effective and saving them money as well. So that usage to us is around, obviously, our commercial gain. Obviously, we're a business and we're here for to make money. But equally, that relationship needs to be good value, and we treat it as a relationship, and we want our customers to be comfortable, and we want them to get good value for their money, and we want them to be effective, and we want them to be productive. Because if they succeed in their job, then they'll be customers for longer, which is excellent. And so that to us is a fascinating scenario. And it becomes quite complex, because when you start looking at usage across buildings, so if a person's got that 10-person office, if a company's got that 10-person office in one building, but they use another building for half the time, being able to understand that and actually help them shape what they actually purchase. Maybe it's 2 smaller offices in different buildings just because of where their customers are and how their behaviors of not what they do in the space, but actually which spaces and how they move around and who their relationships are with. That starts to become really interesting. And obviously that is a big, is a huge data mining exercise there. That's probably a little bit outside of the realms of comfort for most. But if we can start to see how people genuinely use the space and what suits them better, I think we as a business, as an industry, would be well placed to sort of help people be more effective and more productive.
Miro, you've been nodding along there, so I'm guessing you're in agreement with a lot of what Peter said. Is there anything that you'd like to add that hasn't been covered?
Yeah, that's definitely, Peter. That's spot on. And I was about to say that this is probably one of the best way to actually increase the revenue of Flex Workspace is to actually sell less to your office members, and that was the best example ever. Like 10 people company. Most of the cases, they don't need actually 10 desks. And it's so much better to sell them a 6-person office and then 2 or 3 or 4 co-working memberships. It depends. I mean, we have hundreds of customers doing this, and it's a really strong additional revenue opportunity, because having also the opportunity that the technology to track this and make sure that you actually have the capacity to handle the demand, this gives you a way to really increase the utilization of the building. And especially after the coronavirus, this will be even bigger thing, because obviously companies now realize that actually they don't need an office in the same way they used to think before. I mean, and this changed even us. We used to be in a 60-person office because we're a 60-people company. Now we moved into a 40-person, and the rest will be like co-working memberships, work from home, and a different combination of things. And actually, our space as well can optimize even better because of this. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. We pay less, they sell more, and it's definitely an incredible opportunity to add additional revenue to Flex Workspace.
Okay, thank you. And that possibly moves us on well to my next question as to whether there are examples of how data can be used to drive secondary revenue streams. Adam, is that something you could kick off on?
Yeah, sure, happy to. Just to reiterate Miro's point, if this data is used properly, it can be a great competitive advantage for the operators to start having that conversation with their clients, and their clients feel valued because you're not trying to oversell them. You're taking the time to really understand their needs and provide them with that productivity solution that suits them and their business. And so it's win-win. You end up having more space overall that you can then sell to other people, and at the same time maintaining that relationship with clients and sharing that data on a regular basis, and reporting back, particularly to large corporates who are increasingly using FlexSpace, as to whether they've chosen the right solution and the right level of membership. In terms of secondary revenue streams, I think, as I said early on, a lot of operators have really tended to focus on the core product, the bit they understand, the bit that's easy to fill, and that's desks. And if 70 to 80% of your building is made up of desks, then obviously that's the priority. But once occupancy is reaching capacity, where do you go? How do you grow your business? There's kind of limited options, really. You can either put your prices up, which something that's not going to be very easy in the current environment, or you go and find a new building and you start the whole thing again. But where I think there's a great opportunity is to really focus on those secondary revenue streams, such as virtual office solutions, co-working memberships, meeting rooms, and so on. And you can only really start to understand those if you've got the data to understand how breakout space is being used. If you've got people that are sat there all day, every day, only paying a lounge membership, but getting the same benefit that someone's paying for an office, that's a conversation that you can have. Meeting room credits. I've seen in several operators I've been working with, you look at meeting rooms at lunchtime and they're all full of one person sat at a desk having lunch watching Netflix because they've got enough credits. So using the data, you can really work on examining, on analysing which secondary revenue streams you can push to grow the business.
Okay, thank you. Peter or Miro, is there anything you'd add to that?
I think in terms of secondary revenue streams, within Flex, obviously, we have an opportunity to provide a large number of alternative services, and so many of our buildings have cafes in them and gyms now and various other things, and we're looking to upgrade the quality of our meeting room experience. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities there, and I think certainly within the whole coronavirus scenario, people are asking interesting questions about how they're going to get their daily coffee and how they're going to get their Deliveroo to their desk. And it's really interesting to see how that's going to unfold and what new customer expectations are going to be, and then how we can react to actually providing that service, because people are nervous about being out and about. And beyond the standard sort of what we can provide, people don't want to stand in a queue in a cafe downstairs. I mean, that's not even allowed anymore. So there's an opportunity there, which is an absolutely fascinating and unfolding one that we're learning about slowly. But one of the things that we're finding is that quality is really important. So video conferencing, in-room video conferencing, built-in video conferencing is something that we are looking to provide in at least 2/3 of our meeting rooms as an included service. And so obviously the price of that room and the cost of that room goes up, so our pricing will naturally tend up a little bit. But the expectation of the service and the ability for people to then use that room, because it now has a special feature that they weren't previously able to get anywhere, and it provides a very different experience. I think that's kind of where one of the things that we're looking at is improving the quality and making our product that much more attractive. And the experience that goes with using that product is a bit more attractive as well. So the secondary revenue, there's a huge amount there, and I think also as buildings get bigger, people are looking for more within the building. People have less time to travel. People are very busy, and they don't have the opportunity to go out and go 4 blocks over, or whatever it ends up, 4 streets over, to the gym. They want to go to the gym in the building. And it's about seeing how we can incorporate those types of services within the building. Not specifically technology driven, but just interesting in terms of how people use the space as well.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder to everyone watching that if you have any questions that haven't been asked on things, do put them into the chat box. Now's the opportunity as we're sort of heading towards the end. So moving on, perhaps this is a question that doesn't quite work for the current times, but in more general, does data and technology give you a better understanding of being able to predict who may or may not be at risk of leaving or looking for more space within the buildings? Miro, is that something that you could comment on?
Maybe I'll leave the guys to start this one, because I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah,
Adam, is that anything that you have thoughts on?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of the reluctance that I think many people have had to really embracing some of these PropTech solutions is because they haven't been able to get the data into a meaningful way to understand it. And I think that's slowly changing. That's certainly the stuff that we're helping lots of people with. We've talked about the use of space and understanding how people use different areas, how many people use breakout spaces, how many people use meeting rooms, and so on. But there's lots of leading indicators that we can start to put together. For example, if you've got that team that's got 20 desks with you, you can start to look at how many visitors they're getting, what their meeting room use is looking like. Have they added on any co-working memberships recently? And if that's all heading in the right direction, then you've got a pretty good idea that 6 months down the line, that 20-person team might need 30 desks. So that's great insight to have, because as your building is getting towards capacity, you've worked hard to get this client in the first place. You've worked hard to look after them and maintain their experience throughout. The last thing you want to do after 12 months is leave you because you don't have the space to accommodate them. So if you manage those leading indicators, you can start to have the conversation at a much earlier stage. And on the flip side, if you've got someone who's not using your meeting rooms, not using some of the facilities, not coming to your events, footfall dwindling, I think that gives a good indication that you need to re-engage with these people. Is it because their business is suffering, or is it because the experience that you've provided isn't up to scratch? So some great leading indicators can be provided.
Peter, is there anything you'd add on that in terms of anticipating customer needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we're starting to see is that we're a service industry, service certainly as we are. We're a service provider, not necessarily a space provider. And it's what we are also interested in is tying customer experiences, and like, how many complaints have you had? Have you had to have the light bulb changed 6 times? Or do you like it hot or cold, or whatever it is? And having a look at how their interactions, their soft interactions with us are, and using that as a method of tying their experience and their customer journey and their customer state with what's actually happening. So when it comes to that renewal discussion, or when it comes to that conversation around whether they need to upsize or downsize, we actually have a good contextual understanding of what they're doing. So they can never get the meeting room that they want. That's a really important thing. Or they've had a lot of complaints around the lift or something like that. So it's about being able to understand how the service is tied to the space usage and what those two things look like, because then you really start getting a contextual understanding of what the customer experience actually is. Because in a typical real estate world, you sort of like sign a lease and then you don't see the person for 5 years, and then it comes with this big discussion around a renewal, and it's quite disconnected. And we, as the Office Group, find that actually is very connected. And their experience in the building and what happens and how that changes over the year that they've been there is something that we really want to start seeing a little bit more information on, and start taking into account a bit more when it comes to understanding what's happening within our buildings.
Thank you. Mira, is there anything you'd add on that?
I think probably what I would do is to look into like a super standard things like Net Promoter Score, so NPS, and customer satisfaction score. So you may run these with the customers, and something else that I would personally look into is the stage of the companies. Are they in a growth stage? Are they funded? do they have new funding and that kind of stuff? But other than that, I'm not very sure if there are any. I mean, obviously, the leading indicators that both Adam and Peter mentioned, they are extremely valid. But yeah, it's a hard one.
Okay. Thank you. So perhaps just to wrap up, and we've obviously covered an awful lot of ground in a relatively short space of time. Is there one piece of advice that you'd give to operators, perhaps particularly smaller operators, on something that they should really focus on with technology and data that could bring a real benefit to their business? Adam, start with putting you on the spot on that one.
I think we've covered a lot, and the topic of this conversation is really what it's all about. And it's harnessing data really in a way that provides that insight to grow the business. Our sector has been hugely disrupted. Service officers were doing well, flying along for ages, and then the whole sector has been kind of turned up on its head, and everyone's been learning about what the best way forward is over the last 10 years, as we've kind of gone through co-working 1.0 to flex space 2.0. So data's critical with that. And I think combining the digital experience with the physical experience is so important. And I think those operators that have really maintained their revenues and maintained their members over the last few months, I'm going to hazard a guess, are the ones that have provided a really ongoing immersive experience through digital platforms. I came across this word phygital recently, which kind of blends the physical space and digital, and just relates back to that community. I think people have overused the word community in flex spaces. Some people don't really understand what it means. Some people think, do I have to provide it? What's the value of it? Is it the glue? Do people want it? Are they just paying for flexibility? But I think in times like this, the content that can be provided digitally, the whole user experience, which will then ease our way back into work, is absolutely important.
Peter, what's your thoughts on this? Obviously, the Office Group have more resources perhaps than some of the smaller operators, but what would be your advice?
in terms of a small provider, so one of the, actually just in terms of what's happened over the last little while, we find interesting in terms of a digital experience is that we've done a lot of virtual member events instead of physical member events. So we used to do, physical events, which might be a talk or a yoga session or whatever it is, and we've moved those all digital, and it's worked really well actually, and we found people have really enjoyed it. And there's been cooking classes and yoga, desk-based yoga is another one that's been very popular. But in terms of understanding what a small and new flex-based provider might look for, I would try and start with looking at living a day in the life of a customer and seeing what exactly it is that you use, and not underestimating the small stuff. So, people think, Zoom in a room, which is what we do physically, installing Zoom in a room. It sounds like a relatively trivial thing, and it's actually, it's not, in terms of old style video conferencing, not that expensive. But if you get it right, and you get the experience right, and the choice of the speaker right, and the choice of the camera right, and the positioning of all the stuff right, it changes the experience quite fundamentally. And don't underestimate the details and how a very subtle change in deploying your technology can actually make a very big difference to the experience. And it's not something that necessarily is obvious, but it's definitely something you can feel. So it's like that Michelin star cooking versus, not Michelin star cooking. And it might be the same thing and it might achieve the same result, but it's a very different experience. And I say not underestimate the small stuff. Definitely pay attention to the details, because tech implementation, when done well, is a very different experience from tech implementation done bad.
Thank you. I love the idea of living a day in the life of a customer, which is probably useful across all sorts of services provided. Miro, finally, is there anything that you would suggest as sort of top tip on things to focus on?
I think communication is the most important element of any business, and especially in the service businesses right now. So keep your customers and members as close as possible, talk to them as much as you can, and use any technology that can actually help you keep your customers closer, whether that's mobile apps, web portals, or any tool, any technology that can help you stay closer to your customers right now is an investment that's worth it. Over communicate everything. That's the most important element of, in my opinion, right now. Keep your members informed.
Okay, thank you very much to Adam, Miro, and Peter. So we are planning some further webinars, which we'll release details of as soon as we've got them finalised. Or this webinar and all of the ones that we've done in the past are on our YouTube channel, which you can find through various social media channels, and it's linked to from our website. So thank you very much for watching and taking part this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.